Hello, everyone. Thank you for watching this short video about the science fiction book Bringer of Light. My name is M. Thomas Apple. This is the first of a few short videos to tell you about the origins of the story, the locations of the story, the various characters, and the science behind the story of Bringer of Light. First, it is a science fiction story, of course. Most of it is set in outer space. There are lots of different locations. The basic plot is that we're in the future, not too far in the future. Asteroids have been mined for their minerals. The situation on Earth is getting a little more politically fraught, if more than possible than it already is. You can see how it might get even worse. There are various factions vying for domination, and they all need the minerals. The asteroid hunters, like the crew of the spaceship Artemis, are going out to get. And in one of the asteroids that the crew finds, there's something additional in the water that they get from the asteroid that makes them change who they are. And that sets things in motion for the rest of the series. So, the genesis of this story.
Impressive. They can make planets.
Not that genesis. A different genesis of this story is, as I mentioned, valuable asteroid materials. This has been well known for quite some time. About 10, 15 years ago, there were a number of articles online about various corporations setting up kind of a way they thought maybe they could send robots to asteroids. I'm going past that and saying there are going to be people in ships going to these asteroids and there will be miners on the asteroids if they're big enough. But maybe they'll even just find an asteroid, grab it, bring it back with them. Or maybe they'll even send it somewhere if the technology exists in the future. So it is obviously, there is some suspension of disbelief, but the science behind it is real. Again, like I said, I'll talk about that in a different video. If you can't remember HCNO, there's the periodic table of elements. I wasn't a science major. I'm kind of a science nerd, I guess. But I do remember that we need hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen to live. So these are the basic elements that we would need to live on Mars, for example. But there are other niceties like FeCO and that's iron, cobalt, and nickel. These are elements that we would need for industrial space stations, for example, platforms, ships, ports, all sorts of stuff like that in space. It would be a lot cheaper to make it in space rather than send it up from the Earth, is the main idea. And there might be some other platinum group stuff that I can't remember, but I guess they're used in catalytic converters and LCDs and other things like that. So all of these things are already, it's well known, they're already available. I went one step further and thought, well, rather than just looking for the materials that we need to build things, what about organic molecules? And we know that amino acids, for example, have been found in asteroids like Bennu and Ryugu and others. Perhaps this was contributing to the formation of life on Earth. That's one theory, that maybe most or all of the life on Earth comes from asteroids. We certainly know that most of the water on Earth came from somewhere else, perhaps. Asteroids might have been one major contributing factor, and we have found a lot of water, hydrogen and oxygen combined, H2O, in frozen form in asteroids and comets. So I thought, well, you've all seen famous movies where aliens show up on ancient Earth and they kind of disintegrate their bodies and then they become us. Other things like that. You've seen many famous science fiction TV series based on novels where there are aliens that show up and then you kind of become a zombie if you get vomited on, or that kind of disgusting stuff. So I wanted to make it a little more forward-looking, a little bit more positive thinking, with kind of an alien element to some degree, but not really necessarily alien as in alien. Just we don't know where this genetic material came from. What would happen if we drank it? How would it change our physical chemistry? How would we interact with what's in the water that we don't understand? So I went from a hardcore science in the beginning, and as the story slowly progresses, it gets a bit more mystical while trying to retain that science element. There are lots and lots of locations. That's a different video about that. Basically, these are the three main locations: Mars, Ceres, which is a dwarf planet in the asteroid belt, Lunar Base, which is on the moon, obviously. And I kind of anticipated a bit. The name of the starship is Artemis, and that was before. I promise, I swear, they came up with the idea 9 years ago before NASA announced its Artemis Moon Gateway program, which came, I think, the next year or so after I started writing my story. So there are a lot of leapfrogging narrative type of devices throughout the story. There's a lot of locations, so the plot does leap around a bit and go back and forth. Um, that's done on purpose because I want to make sure that it felt more realistic, that the characters don't necessarily know what other people are doing in other locations. And there is a fair amount of miscommunication back and forth because space is huge. Even just the solar system itself is huge. And I'll talk again more about that in another video. So obviously, I've got several science fiction influences, Star Trek being the earliest one, maybe not the biggest one for this story. But the idea of having a multi-ethnic, multilingual crew, I think, is very relevant for not just the present, but also the future. And that shows up way back in the 1960s. Although most of my knowledge of Star Trek comes from the 1980s and 90s when I was in high school and college. So I tried to retain that kind of element of mutual cooperation while also adding a bit of conflict. Deep Space Nine being my favorite of the Star Trek shows in the 90s. That tension, I think, is necessary between the characters as they begin to develop as people. There's a little bit of Firefly, which was a shortly lived TV series by Joss Whedon, Serenity being the name of the movie, and the ship itself. And probably the ship design influenced the way I describe the ship Artemis that's in my story. Some of the humor, perhaps, as well. And the biggest science fiction writing influence is probably Dune, which you all know has become a huge movie series now. There were a lot of shows already on US TV about 20, 24 years ago. Of course, there's the famous movie made in the 1980s. I read the books first, and the books were very, very difficult to read, but they were very influential, I think, in my writing style about how the story was structured. So not necessarily the background of the characters or the plot, but the way the story was developed, I think, especially the first 2 to 3 books of the series. Don't bother reading books 5 and 6; they're not very good. I'm also a big fan of the big three. Well, primarily Isaac Asimov for his politics, not his dialogue, and Robert Heinlein, one of my favorites, just the way the characters interact. And the moon setting, I think, is in my novels very much based on some of what he had written, again, in the late 60s and early 70s. This is, I hope, the first of 3 in a series called The Children of Pella. You can guess the name: Artemis, Pella, Areopagus, Omphalos. There's a strong element of myth, especially Greek, but also there's a lot of Chinese, there's a lot of Indian, other things that I've thrown in there. Some of the characters speak Ukrainian, for example. Hope to have the second book out by 2026. Fingers crossed. I've got it plotted, outlined, synopsis, first 4 or 5 chapters or so. Return to Omphalos 2028. Synopsis, no outline yet, but hopefully the big goal is to get the whole thing wrapped up in 2028. So if you're interested, please take a look. There's my author website. I'll come back and make a couple more videos to tell you more about the characters, the locations, and the science in the near future. Thank you for watching.